good morning. My name is Jamie Ann Jacobin. I'm the director of the James Remick Alliance for Craft. We're an organization dedicated to appreciation, education, and connoisseurship of American craft. So we love what we do, and we love that we have the opportunity to invite amazing artists like the one today. Just so you know, this is a Zoom meeting, so at the end you'll be able to ask questions. You can keep your camera on if you like, but we do ask you to remain muted during the main part of the call unless we open it up. Also, if you need closed captioning, it's at the bottom of your screen. So if anyone needs help with that, you can just put it in the chat. Leila Stone will be helping in the chat if you have questions or you missed something, and we'll also be reading those questions out loud. So you can either turn yourself on and say hello at the end when there's questions, or you can put them in the chat. With that, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Ravenel. Rebecca is our president and the chair of the Distinguished Artist Series. So Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Jamie Ann. And again, welcome to everyone. And this is really exciting to see so many new faces here. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our Distinguished Artist Series. This is the first one in our 2023 season. So for that series, each season, we invite 4 notable craft artists from around the country to join us for a weekend of events, which include a Saturday workshop demo and a Sunday artist talk. So there will be another event tomorrow, which we welcome you to join us for also. So today we are so honored to have the extraordinary ceramic artist, Cristina Córdova, to share her process of creating figurative sculptures. She's joining us from her beautiful studio at Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina. She'll be making a figure as we watch. So again, if you have questions, put them in the chat for us to ask, or there'll be a chance at some point to unmute and ask directly if you want to do that. Just a note, because of the way the video and audio are set up to show her entire process, please let us know if you're having any trouble seeing or hearing, so that we can adjust accordingly as we go, because we don't want you to miss out on anything. So watching some clips of Cristina's process, I was really struck by the facility and the ease she has when she's molding clay into a face or figure. And I think this really speaks to her deep knowledge of anatomy and technique, but also of that sort of ineffable quality, almost like the clay is speaking or becoming through her hands without a filter. So I'm especially excited that we really get to watch her create something in front of us. So I can't wait to get a look at that, and I'm going to turn it over to Cristina right now.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for the James Remick Alliance for having me here, and to all of you for joining me. So what we're going to be doing today is a 27-inch figure rendered solidly from a clay body, a pretty soft clay body, meaning it doesn't have a lot of filler. It's called Earthen Red from High Water. And I am going to have someone drop, Lila, if you could drop the materials list on the chat for you guys. And aside from the materials used here, there's a more comprehensive list that applies to this technique as well as my hollow building technique. There's a link that will take you to that list. It's in my Teachable school. And of course, if you have any questions, just reach out to me. So I build my sculptures primarily through 2 different strategies, either hollow constructions through the use of slabs, and it's a technique I favor, especially for large scale pieces. And when I'm doing something that's more gestural at a smaller scale, I often will shift over and build it solidly. And the way I go about it is I set up this armature, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And then I build the masses, the primary masses. As those dry, I can bring out more detail. And before the piece fully sets, I will cut it apart, hollow it out, and reset it, and then do like the last maybe 10% of refining once that piece is assembled at the end. So let's just jump right into it. The first thing I do is I edit and print out photographic references. This isn't essential, but this is what I've been orienting towards now, a little bit more of naturalistic grounding through the use of photographic references. And again, these are printed to scale, so they're 27 inches high. And I use them kind of like blueprints. And the first engagement will have to do with gathering information to establish my armature. And this armature is pretty simple. You can build it with galvanized steel pipe that you can get at the hardware store. You just need a wooden surface to affix it to. And aluminum sculpture wire, which is another pretty straightforward and accessible material that you could get at any art supply. So the first measurement that I'm going to get is the distance between the bottom of the foot. The side view is a little bit more straightforward, and the middle of the figure, which is in the pelvic area, particularly in the joint between the femur and the pelvic bone, which is also referred to as the great trochanter, and it's traditionally considered the middle of the body. And that's where I am going to put this T, and then I'm just gonna simply run this span of wire across, bend it, and make a note for the knees. Again, bend it, looking at these simple diagonals that I've established over my reference, and then I'm ready to go. So from the pelvic area up, everything is going to be built mostly without an armature. If I need a little bit more support, I will just introduce a rod from the top, and then I'll hollow everything, working my way down. So now that we have that, I'm just going to start bringing the clay onto the armature. And I was hoping that this would be a dialogue. So if you have any questions as I'm working, this is a slow process, as anybody who's been engaged with figure modeling knows. So there'll be plenty of time as I'm working for me to answer questions. So feel free to drop them in the chat and they'll be relayed to me. So let's go. One more thing I want to note is that we are going to divide this demo in 3. So I'm going to spend a third of the time building onto this, and then I'm going to move to this sculpture, which is already at the hollowing stage. And then we're going to move on to the table so that you see how a hollow piece is reassembled, or a hollow set of pieces is reassembled.
So I saw at least one person in the chat who has taken a workshop before with Cristina. I wonder how many people maybe put in the chat, or you've taken 2 workshops, Sue. If you want to put in the chat that maybe you've had this opportunity before. Yeah, there's a few people. This is great.
This is great because they have probably taken a workshop where I've taught how to build a figure with a hollow method. So with a slab building method. So this is going to be a nice little twist.
That's great. And someone already has a questions about the wires and whether they'll be removed, but I know you're going to cover that later on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So at this first stage, you just want to put as much material as you can without worrying too much about refining it. So we're just trying to cover that wire and create a skin that will add stability and allow us to start bouncing our eyes from the different sections and cross-referencing.
I was on mute. Cristina, you actually told us yesterday that you haven't taught this class in quite a while with this method. When do you think the last time was?
I haven't ever.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, well, we're really in for a treat then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a world premiere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a technique that it's interesting because my work is kind of at the crossroads between traditional modeling, which is done like this with solid construction, and ceramic hand building, which is normally done through slabs, at least in the context of functional wear. And when you're building solid, for the most part in that realm of traditional modeling, you intend for the piece to be cast. So it's never really, the piece itself is never really fired or taken to that next section. But I became intrigued by that when I started to see the work of colleagues like Tip Tolan and Beth Kavanaugh years ago, because they decided to stay with that solid method and see it through the firing by hollowing it out, and then they started to play with scale to allow these things to happen in larger and larger compositions. The problem that I found with my work is that I like to glaze, and once you start getting into larger scales with this strategy, you have to fire in sections. So it's harder to have just an integrated piece that you can just glaze all at once, and that's when I kind of settled on the slab building technique. But lately, this has been calling to me, so I'm excited to like drop into it and explore it and see where it overlaps with my other approaches and share it through teaching.
So when would you use this method as opposed to the slab method? Or is there no rhyme or reason? It just kind of is organic?
Well, traditionally in my practice, it has been a measure of scale, almost exclusively. Like if the work is of smaller scale, there really isn't a need to build, to use the hollow technique, because this at a smaller scale up to, let's say, 27 inches is fairly comparable. If I go large, at a larger scale, then I normally default to the hollow building technique, because this becomes a little unstable for me. And like I mentioned before, I don't feel I can glaze it as readily as if a piece is like all resolved in bigger sections.
So I think it's interesting that you can switch your materials and techniques to sort of address maybe an issue that you already know about, like the glaze issue you mentioned, but also that when you switch all that, it might bring up other directions that you hadn't thought of.
Absolutely.
So do you ever?
This is it's an ongoing journey, and it's really responsive to what your immediate aesthetic goals are, which are always in flux. And it's always called to get to that edge of novelty as well. So like when you've done something and you perfected it and you walk that path long enough, you're always looking at you get a little bit eager to find some sort of pivot that will kind of revitalize the practice. And usually for me, looking at the techniques and opening up different possibilities will bring that kind of like infusion of just allowing me to reconnect again with the practice. And through that, technical shift, it carries over to the concepts too. So
and so you talked about the slab and the solid. Do you ever work with molds when you're making your figures, or no?
I use molds. When do I use molds? In the past, I've used molds if I'm making like a series of, let's say, like 10 heads. I will make a mold that will be kind of like the embryonic shape that I can just then take the different directions, but have a sense that it's all a series of heads of the same scale, for example. But mostly everything is built individually because I work with different references that change. And so it's easier for me to just, start from scratch to make sure that I'm attuned to the proportions that each set brings.
So Christina, this might be something that you go into tomorrow in your artist talk, but why the figure? Why is that your main focus?
So I didn't have any specific agenda when I started with this material as a junior in undergrad. I really truly fell in love with the material itself, independent from any embodiments. And then through the process of finding my voice, I realized that because I had been a dancer for many years, the language of the figure and the language of gesture felt very comfortable for me. And so I started to come out. And during that time, I was working with a teacher who picked up on that and supported it and made me feel like that was a valid direction. So I definitely feel that's one of the reasons. I also grew up Catholic and grew up surrounded by the beautiful, intense, melodramatic figures in a Catholic church. And I was very taken by them and attuned to them from a very early age. And so there was something about that as well that I feel activated with me once I started working with clay.
So can you go over, you have this armature in the legs, and then you do not have an armature in the top. So you're just covering the wires as of now. So do you have to really think about the placement of your wires? And then can you also maybe talk a little bit about how you're looking at the model and working with the model? I know Sue asked a question about, like, do you pay your models, like, and do you have to pay them separately when you're photographing them? And, you know, maybe a little bit of information about that.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you can see here, these lines. So I have a piece of plastic that I've draped over my references.
Mhm.
And I'm using these to establish the more or less the alignment of those wires on the inside. So those were my guides. And then right around here, this projection out here is what establishes that joint between the head of the femur and the pelvis. That's where this T sits. And so the wire is threaded through that. So that's kind of the first step in order to start being able to migrate information from my references to my armature. There's a little play here, you know, sometimes as you'll see here, for example, the armature was a little bit off, and so it's sticking from the front, but it's not catastrophic. I will be able to mend that. Let me actually get my spray bottle. And so now what I'm doing is doing this like a very initial pass where I'm mostly covering and giving myself something to hold on to so that I can then start reading profiles. And what I mean by that, this technique requires you, when you start to enter into this stage, which is a little further than what we're doing right now, that you just orient the sculpture to the vantage point that you're seeing in the photographic reference, and you start to read that silhouette. And so you're gonna try to articulate that silhouette first in bigger brush strokes, which might require more of an angular perception, and then turning all those into curves and subtle shifts. And you do that from this vantage point, and then you shift your perspective to match the next one, and then so on and so forth. And you do that in cycles. And then the collective rendering of those silhouettes is what's going to give you a naturalistic result. And so we're just getting started. This clay is quite soft. So as I'm working into it, I need to compress it really well and also wait for it to set a little bit so that it doesn't just kind of melt off that armature. I think I'm gonna take out of our third, I'm gonna take the most in this one, or maybe a little bit more, just to show you as much as possible.
And so you do not need an armature for the top part.
Yeah, I'm just going solid. What I will do as I start to bring in the head is add a rod on the top, just to stabilize it a little bit. And I'll show you what that will look like on the sculpture when we start taking it apart. So right now I'm not taking measurements and I'm not reading silhouettes that carefully. I'm just kind of, eyeballing it very like in a cursory way and just trying to get as much of the material in there as possible. And then I'm going to start making some notes onto the clay, and as it dries, I'll be able to start bringing more focus onto the forms.
So then back to Sue's questions, where do you usually find your models? And are you paying them separately for photos, or is that?
No, so I use two types of models. The first ones are usually people close to me. Recently, my most consistent model has been my youngest daughter, Eva. And so I bring her into the studio and photograph her and use that mostly to make life-size renderings of her. And then for my classes and for other figures that are less about portraiture and more about just the essence of the female figure, I go to databases that already have a library of photographic references. And I just purchased a photo set that comes with really high resolution images, and I work from those.
So is that what these are behind you?
Yep.
That's interesting, because then you can kind of apply your own, maybe how you're feeling that day might come out in the piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting going actually through the process of looking at the library of photos. This company in particular is called Postspace. Been using them for like 15 years. And so they've grown and they have so many poses, and I just love kind of looking through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images to find like just this resonance. And the same thing happens with Eva. Like we do pretty extended photo shoots where she's just like following my cues and kind of embodying different positions and different gestures until we get to something that seems to strike a chord. And once we find it, then we photograph it in the round. But sometimes you don't even know. You have a sense of what it is, but then when you actually look at it, it doesn't seem that interesting. And by looking through, this like vast assortment of images, there's another one called 3D.sk. You can really understand or kind of attune your concept to the gesture in a way that could be hard to do from your imagination.
I didn't catch the first one, but I did catch 3D.sk. I'll put that in the link.
All this is also in the materials in the resources section of my book segment on that Teachable link. So it's all you have to do is put your name and email, and you have everything there, and images, and also web links, so you know specifically what companies I'm using.
Okay. Thank you. So one person mentioned that they took your Domestica course. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know that you have been really progressive, I think, in terms of adapting your teaching during COVID. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know that, I don't know, it was a little crazy maybe that we even had to move this direction, but I wonder how you feel about it.
I'm sure it happened to many artists who teach and supplement their practice, their making practice by teaching. I mean, not only financially, but just as a way to replenish, yourself. When COVID came, there was a little bit of a panic because, at least in my case, 6 months of work were canceled and, within weeks. And so it was this sense of, okay, so how can I, find alternatives for these workshops and also find alternatives to stay connected to people. And these Zoom experiences and these hybrid teaching experiences became a way to do that. And then after that, just standard pre-recorded workshops started to enter into my repertoire. And Domestika was great because they're a huge company that had a massive growth spurt as a reaction to, because of COVID. And I had known about them for many years because they're from Spain. I just love that they just had a great, fresh take on making and craft with grounded in the Spanish language. So they were mostly originally geared to the Hispanic or Spanish speaking community. And so I've been following them for a while. So after they grew and they started to operate out of New York, the possibility to collaborate with them came about. And so that was great. And that definitely allowed me to understand that these online courses open up these avenues for people from all over the world to engage with your materials, with your techniques, to reach out to you. And yeah, I was just absolutely hooked and feel very grateful for that collaboration. I'm going to be heading there in summer to do a follow-up to that initial course. So yeah.
That's exciting. So do you had to go there? Is that what you're saying? Or do they come to you?
I have to go there. So we film out of their New York studios. They have studios in LA, New York, Madrid. Yeah, they had a big growth spurt.
Do you think the availability of all these online resources and workshops will have an effect on places like Penland and all that, where you go for an in-person experience, or they're just two different things because one's so immersive and residential?
That came up a lot in many of the committees that I participated on because I was involved, for example, in Penland's venture into online teaching. And my conclusion is that one becomes a funnel for the other. Or it's something that's experienced at a completely different level. So I don't see them as competing necessarily at all. I feel that the level of experience you could get from an online course can be thorough, but it never will replace, the ability of witnessing a course in person and leaving home and, all the other aspects that compound that kind of experience or any other in-person class. So yeah, it made me feel good to acknowledge that because we were all kind of scratching our heads, especially Penland, and making this big investment that it did some years ago. They wanted to understand, what impact it would have when they circled back and started in-person classes.
Cristina, jumping back to what you're working on now, are you just still adding clay? Because it looks like you're starting to maybe, I don't want to say take away, but form a little bit more of that.
Starting to kind of add a little logic to these blobs. So still pretty loose, but trying to and this is great. I mean, this is completely uncharted for me. I love that we're doing this because like I said, in my normal way of teaching, I know exactly how long it takes me to move from, you know, one section of the body to the next, and you know, it's been perfected throughout, you know, many workshops. So this is great. This feels like as I'm doing this, I'm learning exactly like how it varies.
Yeah, well, that is so fascinating that we get to see you do this and we get to sort of see you thinking about it, not just doing it, but really kind of considering it in real time too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
I also like that we're going to do a little bit of the cooking show. Because I do want people to leave with an understanding of all the potential this technique has at this scale. And it's hard to compress that in an hour and a half.
So I have a question about the armature. Usually when I make my figures, I do hollow and slab. So are you using a specific type of wiring for the armature?
Yes, I'm using aluminum wire and galvanized steel pipe.
Okay, and so the clay will not crack once it's been fired?
No, this is not fired on the armature. This is going to be taken off the armature.
Oh,
We're
okay.
gonna get to that soon.
And just to help people see this, can you maybe is it possible to swivel that so we can see how it's, yeah, there you go, how the pipe comes into the armature and everything. Yeah, great.
Is it helpful for you when you're looking at the screen and you can see it? Because even the way you just moved it back, it was really easy for us to see that it needed to move back because we could see the image right behind it.
Yeah, so normally I would be right in front of it, looking at the sculpture in reference to the figure. It's called sight sizing. So your eyes darting back and forth, and you're migrating the information from that silhouette, and you can really make, you know, pick up on those subtle shifts. I'm not doing that now because I don't want to block you. But just keep that in mind that, as I mentioned at the beginning, what you want to do is just really move this so that your eye is moving through this onto your reference, and you're just working with what you can see. And then you do this for all the vantage points. And then once you have that blocked in, you move on to additional in-between references. And those I just keep in my computer. I don't feel I need to print everything to scale. Because these ground the proportions for me, and then the in-between ones fill in the information that cannot be perceived by these cardinal views. Okay, so I'm gonna start making some adjustments. Taking some notes. Let's see. I'm taking my calipers. I'm gonna take a measurement between the bottom of the pubic triangle and the belly button, so that I can start to commit to some measurements and start bringing a little bit more focus. And then from the bottom of, or the belly button to the bottom of the breast, in this case, the right breast. And there's a slight shift here. So it's a very slight contrapposto. So I'm just gonna take some notes so that I can start.
Have you done a lot of anatomical research also? Like, you know, what's under that in terms of bones and all that? Are you aware of all that? You must be.
Yeah, I have researched the bony landmarks that seem to have an obvious dialogue with the surface of the form. So I'm no expert. I can't really tell, you know, I can't break down the whole figure, but definitely the structures, the estructuras óseas, the bony landmarks that come through repeatedly. So, you know, starting from above, the clavicle, the sternum, the shape of the rib cage, which is often described as an egg, the pelvic area, the connection to the femur, which is that, again, that midline between the top and the bottom, and is the widest point in a woman's hip area. And then, you know, the knee and the joints in the knee and the ankle bones, the shape of the shin bones, the quality, the curved quality. So all those things, I definitely have kind of like an imprint of what they look like, you know, from the inside, you know, as a bone. And it definitely colors, you know, how I'm sculpting. But there's the key skill is observation, because oftentimes, depending on the pose, those are obscured or, you know, taken off center, so that it's hard to establish, you know, the rhythm with that only. And that's when you really need to combine that with what you're observing.
And can you talk a little bit about why you are attracted to the realism or almost hyper realism rather than anything more abstract in figurative sculpture?
I think if you look at my work, you'll see that I wonder, you know, like I move in and out of realism or naturalism, or the degree to which I render naturalistically changes a lot. And when I move towards it, I feel there's a sharpness that comes through when you get closer to nature. And so conceptually, like I feel it becomes like a more acute statement. And if I open up, it becomes more like archetypal. And so I kind of move in and out depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. These sculptures are being built for an exhibition in Puerto Rico that's going to be in May. And I'm talking about, you know, things that are a little bit sharp, a little bit thorny. There's some political messages that I'm trying to hold space for. And so I wanted there to be kind of an edge to the sculpture that felt like a clearly rendered nude. There's like a vulnerability and kind of like a little bit of a boldness and articulating a nude quite naturalistically. And so I guess in a way I am using that as a means to share an observation or a comment.
So Sue wants to know if the bunch of bananas on the figure is a part of that statement.
Yes, the bananas are starting to build on some of the things I'm going to be addressing the bananas. They're actually planting. The planting
Okay.
is a big staple in Puerto Rican cuisine. A lot of the recipes that use them are recipes grounded in our African heritage. And they've also historically become a symbol for masculinity and oppressiveness, so, or oppression. And so there's, a lot, historically in Puerto Rican art, there's several important pieces that show plantain, and they're always being held by men. And so recently I've been playing on the idea of the plantain being held by women.
So you had shown us the lines that you were making on the plastic over your model photos. Do you use the same model photos multiple times for similar figures, and that's why you're using that plastic? Or is it because you move the plastic, or you like to write other things on it?
Yeah, because the plastic, I want to be able to take it away and just see the form without that line drawn in the middle.
I see.
So I did this just to establish the armature and also show you what I'm looking at when I'm establishing the armature. Let's get a thickness here.
Christina, how many of these pieces do you plan on making for that exhibition?
Oh, they're going to be maybe 10.
Okay. Mhm. When you're doing these kind of demos, is this a piece you would keep for the exhibition, or is this a piece that ends up maybe not making it?
Oh yeah, this is going to be kept.
Good, exciting.
Yeah, I think at this stage, time is so precious. So I try my best to keep most everything that I spend, time in, and I try to be thorough when I'm planning on making things so that I just know that I won't lose steam midway through a project, which is something that would happen to me often. When I first started, I would just rush into making, then realize that I was just, missing a little bit of what I was trying to say, and I would just deactivate the whole project. And so now the planning part has become more robust so that I can just stay the course. Right, so the last thing I'm going to do is attach a mask for the head and show you how I'm going to pin that down. And then I'm going to talk briefly about what the next steps would be. And we're going to move on to our next stage. So I think it'll be, I'm going to post the process as it continues down the line with the sculpture on Instagram. So it'll be fun for you guys to see where this ends up.
Great. That's very exciting. When you say post on Facebook or Instagram or both?
Yeah, I think if they're connected, so if it posts to one, it should post to the other.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
We'll try to reshare it too. So, people are looking for it, they can find it on ours as well. That'd be interesting to see.
So something I love doing when I'm building solid that I feel is harder to do when you're building in parts is that you can really distort, like have a dialogue with what you're sculpting and make decisions that override the information you're getting from your photographic references. So it can be really fun, can change the positioning and just really have a heavier hand in how you're styling the sculpture because you're able to see it in relationship to the whole, which is something that is harder to do when you're working in parts. And by the time you get up here, this is so set that it's hard to backtrack. But here at this stage, you can still make some adjustments and it'll be fine. We're missing actually a whole section here.
When you were first learning the kind of the sculptural qualities of the figure, what were things that you found to be maybe more difficult than other? Because it's you make it look very easy. I'm sure you hear that often. But I wonder what were some of the challenges that you first faced when you were learning?
That's a great question. I think my biggest challenge initially was not having a method. I think drawing started to strengthen that observational approach so that when you're facing a source that is so complex, your eye knows where to start. And essentially, it's this idea of working from the silhouette in and then decoding shadows and highlights as forms, as well as negative spaces. So once I got over that kind of foundational strategy through drawing, then I needed other parts of the puzzle that had to do with rendering in the round. And that was the hardest thing for me because I knew how to, manage certain compositions in a 2D from the perspective of 2D. But it wasn't until I went to Italy that I understood, how to move that into or compound that with a 3D rendering strategy. And then once I understood that, then everything became more accessible because then, you have a map. And so that's like from a technical standpoint, from a conceptual standpoint, that's like another kind of worms. Because that that's probably the hardest thing for me now. It's like how to feel conceptually grounded once I know how to do this. You know, I'm fairly proficient in just making a figure, then it's like, well, so what? What are you saying? What's the figure, you know, provoking or revealing or expanding on? And all right. So you get the idea. There's a lot of things here that I want to work on, but I don't want to keep taking time from the other sections. Let's see. Close this so I can see what you guys are seeing. So this is probably as far as I would get before I let things set. And I mentioned the rod. So what I would do with the head, once I find the placement that I like, I bring a rod from the top and just, it gives it a little bit of stability as it's setting. And something I would do now is probably check. I would take the plastic off and take my calipers and start checking the distances first, the verticals, and making notes. You can even get skewers and use them to externally mark bony landmarks for you so they don't get lost. And then I would start cleaning. There's a lot of noise that builds up using this technique by adding so many little bits of clay. And I like to use the rib to push that back and then start again. And so again, it's a cycling process of adding primary masses, waiting for those to set, comparing them through your calipers with the references, making notes, and then starting again and again and again. And as you're doing that, the clay begins to dry and it starts to offer a little bit more resistance. So you can start to actually firm up some of those details. Right now, everything is very smooshable. Everything is just very sensitive to your touch. So keep that in mind. All right. So I'm gonna bring this piece, which is slightly smaller than this. So in order for this to get to this, it would probably be maybe a day and a half more of work. So this is maybe 80 to 90% there. And then once I reassemble everything, I will do that final tuning. Also, some things get a little damaged and mangled as you're taking it apart. But what I want to show you with this piece is the keying that takes place. So the first thing to keep in mind, first kind of rule of thumb, is that you always want to cut along the short way. Sometimes it feels like you could save so much time if you could just get a section and cut it along the long way, but you want to preserve as much of that external. You want to keep the ring that captures that external form intact as much as possible. And you also want to work in favor of gravity. So you want to stack up. So this type of cut is not great. Don't recommend it. This horizontal axis and that ring, that profile is what anchors the form. So if you disrupt that, then you're kind of losing the information. So the first thing I'm going to do is take these out. Just got a little bit drier then. If you find that the sculpture gets away from you and gets a little bit drier, just hydrate it and put a wet cloth, and in an hour or two, it'll backtrack a little bit.
Cristina, can you, I don't know if it's already out, but can you tilt the camera up just a hair so we can see?
Yeah, I got one out and now I'm getting it.
Thank you. Perfect.
Speaking of over drying, Sue Baum wanted to know how you treat the sculptures while they're in process. Do you cover it with plastic? Do you keep it hydrated to some extent?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. I want to protect, I want to be extra careful with the parts that are most vulnerable to drying. So this would be the feet and the arms when they're on. So if I'm going to be working on this for a long time, I might drape plastic over the feet. I do want this to dry right now because like I said, the clay is just so sensitive to touch that I really can't accumulate information without it just compressing back into that mass. So I'm being and I'm in dialogue with it, and depending on what I want to do, I will leave it open or close it. But the norm is at the end of the day, it's just sprayed and covered with plastic.
Great.
So I'm just gonna try to follow the line over the head. There's a rod, I'm sure, in the head here. And I'm gonna cut both arms with this, with the plantain. So this is what I'm gonna get out. And what I'm gonna do next is cut here and then hollow, and then reconnect. I'm gonna keep going down just to show you how I key. There's this rod comparable to the one we put on the other head. There's a rod here for this hand. So I'm gonna cut here and I'm gonna make a key. And slide. Slide this off. Straighten that.
So Christina, I'm really interested about the amount of detail that you had in this piece that you're now taking apart. I wonder why put the detail in before hollowing out as opposed to hollowing it, putting it back together and then adding detail? Is it just about a dryness, or is it your preference?
That's a good question. There's just no other way because the sculpture will never be upright again until it's fired.
Okay.
And so there's no way for me to render in relationship to a photographic reference in the round with as much agility as I can now. And it seems pretty crazy. Like, I'm with you. The first time I tried this about 10 years ago, I had spent, a week sculpting, and I just had, maybe 9 pieces of, segments that were kind of hard to imagine that would hold the information or preserve the information. But it's pretty magical. It does. And then whatever needs to get expanded on or refined, you can do it by putting it, lifting it a little bit on a surface. But most of the information needs to be already done.
Yeah, so you're putting it back together after you do that. You're going to hollow it out, put it back together.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hollow everything until here so that I can, again, have a surface to see it upright and make some refinements if I need to. And then this will come off and I'll start making my way from here up. And then the pelvis will be the last part. And it's kind of, it's slow, but I kind of like it because it's like knitting. It's like the knitting part. There's not a lot of, it's just like a very simple task, and your fingers just go with it. And then before you know it, you reconstituted this thing, and it just seems it does seem surreal how it can come apart and just hold that information somehow in the particles.
But ultimately, for the smaller pieces, sorry, just to clarify, you are going to take it apart, hollow it, put the entire thing back together and fire it whole.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
and we're gonna see that in the next section. We're gonna do a little bit of that. How are we doing on time?
We have half an hour left.
Great. So these parts were a little bit dry. I mentioned the arms and the legs, especially at this scale, tend to lose moisture faster. So you might have to wrap them in a wet cloth before you attempt to hollow them, just so that you're not, breaking the pieces. So what I want to do is move on to the table where I have a piece that I've already segmented and hollow, and just show you how I bring that together. So I'm gonna connect my camera. Just bear with me a second. Great.
That looks great. Thanks, Christina.
Okay. So this is clearly the pelvic area. And I just wanted to show you how I follow it. I just have a series of loop tools. And I am going to go in and take material out. And the key thing here is that this outer skin needs to be set enough so that you can find that edge of the form. If this is too soft, there's really no firm edge, and you'll just keep stretching the particles. So there's a distinct difference between the dryness of the particles inside, which are quite soft, and that external skin, which is set and it's keeping that form or preserving that form so that you're not moving past that boundary and stretching the particles. So once you find that edge, you get as much material as needed to have a consistent wall throughout the composition. And then what I do is I just use my finger and compress, because I want that wall to be nice and strong. And also, as you're adding bits of clay, sometimes you get little air pockets, and I want to make sure that I catch any air pockets that might have been left from just this additive approach.
So you might be adding a piece inside because you feel like you thinned it out too much?
No, I'm not adding. I'm just compressing. I mean, if you thin it out too much, of course you can do that, but right now I'm just finding that edge, and after I've hollowed out, I'm just compressing with my finger against that wall. And now I'm going to find the next form, which, this one, which has already been hollowed. And I'm going to use my key, see that key here? And I am going to find that edge, slip and score, and connect.
Tina, do you ever use paper clay or paper clay slip when you're doing your processes?
Yes, I use paper clay often when I'm building hollow large scale. I like to slip and score and add a little foil on the outside as well. Just gonna show you on the front part so that we can keep adding section. Let's move on to the legs. This is what I meant when the moment where you're like, see all your sculpture in little sections. Let's see. Finding my keys.
Christina, I wonder, we had a question about how you hollow out the arms and legs specifically because they are kind of smaller parts.
So I'll show you. That's a great question, and I'll address that in just a sec. Let me just okay. So this is pretty tight, and in all truth, it probably didn't need to be hollowed. But what I did is grab a little bit and just run it through the tighter parts. And if it's an arm like the one we were doing on this other side, well, that arm had a rod going through, so it's already perforated. The other side of the sculpture didn't. And so what I would do is just run this wire through it, through the length, and then call it a day. As the forms get bigger, like if you're shifting your scale, you might need to hollow every little section. So you would do different cuts again along the horizontal axis and address each section, but at this scale, it's not necessary.
So this is a low fire clay, and it's going to be glazed appropriately. I wonder if there are any differences that you consider in when you're using different clays for different types of firing or glazing processes, or is it all pretty similar process?
So this is a stoneware, so it's a mid-range body. It's not a low fire clay.
Okay.
And when I use paper clay for larger sculptures, I don't take it to full vitrification. I will fire it to contour 2-3 to give it a little bit more density and stability, and then I glaze lower the cone between 0.4 and 1. And so I sometimes want to have the option to fire some mid-range glazes. So in that case, I make sure that I'm using a stoneware. And then other times I just want something red and groggy, so I can just use terracotta and just know that I need to fire with low range glazes. So
But your building technique doesn't change accordingly.
the building technique, well, so the key thing about the building technique that will match the key consideration is if I'm going big, I want the support of that paper pulp and grog, and that's a stoneware. So that's like the only instance. And I will say conversely, when I'm going small, I don't want that extra grog interfering and manifesting in the surface of the piece. And so I will move towards smoother clays, but neither of those are tied to low or, I mean, I'm sure I could find a smooth low fire clay, but in my case, the ones that I love for their texture and for their color happen to be stoneware. All right. So this is also, I think this was dropped in the chat. This is earth and red from high water, and it's super smooth, but the color is just so beautiful that it keeps reappearing in my practice.
So today you've shown us the original building on the armature, then you've shown us kind of cutting up a piece, now putting a piece back together. Do you usually have that kind of dynamic range of processes going on at the same time, or is that only because you're doing this demo today, or how many pieces do you have going on at the same time usually?
I love that question, because this is very, very much the reality of the studio right now. I'm using this technique right now for this exhibition. I'm working on this many pieces. Like I mentioned, they're going to be like 10 or 11 right now. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 playing around. So it can get pretty fussily. When I have a show, I like to just produce as much as I can, as quickly as I can, almost as a way to prove the concept to myself. And so I want to get that first batch fired and on the wall so that I can start, really deciding, okay, do I need to pivot, or is this going to be what I'm hoping it will be? So right now, that's precisely where I am. I just loaded a big kiln, and I'm just waiting to get those pieces out and finish these other ones so that I can take stock and yeah, keep moving down the road. So you can start to see how, something that has a not super dynamic, but it has, some activity, a gesture that has some measure of activity, how it is held by these parts. If you can wait for that skin set enough to hold that information for you while you cut everything in parts and hollow it out.
And can you talk about how you think ahead about the choice of firing methods and the glazing and all that while as you're making the piece, or as a whole when you're conceptualizing the piece? Or
Yes, that's really interesting, because it does start to that dialogue, at least at this stage, starts before or in conjunction to the design of the form. I think at some point in my career, I was just completely, like, my bandwidth was completely taken up by the formal, like the construction part of the piece. And then it was like starting completely from scratch when it came to surface. But I wish you could see, because I just loaded. As I'm working on these, I was working on a number of tests, of surface tests. And I have an idea of what I want these to look like color-wise, but those tests and then these coming out of that first firing will allow me to really understand and validate what I think they should be. So to answer your question, yes, I have ideas and I'm testing them, like the glazes have been formulated. And now I just need to make that final decision and bring them together. And I'll probably glaze a couple in one way, fire them, make sure that I feel comfortable with the results, put them on the wall, live with them for a day or two. So it's kind of a process. I think I was talking to my daughter who's studying art about the creative process and how we're so tempted to resolve so many things in theory or in the vacuum of our minds, and really how limited that is. Even as smart as I know and she thinks she is, it's like there's no competing with actually going through the motions of iterating and kind of exploring an idea in different ways so that you can actually understand like the best strategy. And with clay, that doubles up because you have the formal consideration and then the subsequent surface options that can make it really daunting. And sometimes it's not what you think. Like you have this idea, oh, this is gonna be this color and that'll be that. And then you do that first couple of tests and it just is not hitting the mark. So yeah, I think I know what I'm doing, but we'll see.
That's great. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I don't know how the collective group feels, but we had talked about maybe having a little look around your studio and seeing what you're working on. So I don't know if if we're at a point where maybe we could spend a few minutes doing that before we go.
Yes, I want to put the head on and then it'll
Of course.
And then we can move on. And also any questions that anybody might have. So right now, I just loaded a big kiln.
Oh, Christine, you might need to go back higher. It was right for a second and then it, yeah, perfect. Perfect.
But all those pieces and glaze tests are going to be coming out of the kiln soon. And I think I have an image I can show you. And then I'll just show you my studio. This is actually a space that I moved into at the beginning of the year, of last year, sorry. And it's been great. It's been kind of like the version of my studio that captures all the learning that I did in my previous spaces. So it's kind of the one that seems to be working for all these things that I do from one day to the next, from sculpting myself to hosting interns to turning it into a classroom and on and on.
Somebody had a question about your cutoff wire. Is that just a standard mud tool or whatever brand?
Yeah, just the standard wire. All right, so
So Sue is asking how close to Penland. You're actually on the Penland campus, right?
no, so I'm independent.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's easy for people to get confused because Penland is about, well, let me close this and then I'll explain it. Let's see. Just try to put this a little bit down. All right, so that just gives you an idea of how this would move on. I would add the arms and then do that last 10% that I had talked about in terms of refining, maybe bringing a little bit more detail to the feet and fleshing out the face a little bit more, and then letting it dry. And if I feel that there's any parts that I didn't want to thin out or that might be a little bit thicker, I might just poke a hole to the inside and then cover it from the outside. But in essence, this is gives you a sense of the reconstituted piece.
There's a question about how do you get the legs off, maybe, of that armature that you had built before? Is it that you're taking one leg, the other leg, and then straightening that wire to then?
But yeah, so you cut at the bend and then pull it out. Not unlike what I did with the arm. The arm was bent. So I'm gonna switch real quick to the other. Let me put my camera back on. Okay. All right. So yeah, not unlike what we did with this arm. So you cut and you get one part of the arm out. You straighten the wire and get the other part out. So yes, from this to ultimately that, and then that final wave of refinement. And that's kind of like the summary of the process. And of course, you know, there's little adjustments and unexpected twists and turns that will have to do with your clay body, with the position and the pressure points that the gesture is bringing to the drying process. But overall, this is kind of like the repeating strategy that I've been using for this body of work. And to circle back to your question about Penland, so Penland's like 400 acres, more or less, with a core campus. And this property, for some reason, I don't know why, there's maybe like 7 or 8 properties that never were absorbed in the Penland organization. And this is one of them. So it's like a little cutout. And yeah, so I have my home and the properties of the studios at the top of the property. And so I'm gonna turn around and show you some things that I've been, well, this is the space, and over there in the corner is a big head. It's a scale shift that happened during COVID that I'm really excited to continue to explore. And over there are the remnants of a sculpture that's in the kiln. And there's a landscape there made. I've also have been interested in drawing with clay. I mix different clays with binders and glues, and then use them as a drawing medium. So I have a drawing of my daughter Eva and kind of a landscape. I have some molds of plantain on that table, and that's where I've been working on my surface tests. And let's see. So yeah, and then this is the other side, the entrance. I also decided I wanted to prototype espresso cups because I just get curious about clay and all its forms and possibilities. So here we are.
So somebody was wondering about how you fired that large head. Do you have access to all the different types of kilns at Penland?
No, I have my own kilns. And so I have a stacking kiln. It's if you can imagine an oval and then imagine it stacked on top of, so 2 ovals stacking on top of each other. I have one of those, which is can say a lot about that, but it does let me fire up to 60 inches. And the funny thing is that it's oval shaped, so you can't really tell, but the piece is squat. Like if you were to look at it from the top, it is oval shaped, to like fill every square inch of that kiln.
Wow, we have just a few more minutes. So if everybody wants to just turn on their mics and ask questions, or if there's anything left in the chat that we didn't ask, point that out.
Yeah, there's a question about the glaze or the surface of that large head.
Yeah, it's glazed. So it's bisque and then glazed with different layers of runny glazes. So just kind of pulling the pigment down, giving it that weathered kind of atmospheric quality.
So I wanted to ask, because I've been trying to get that look on some of my pieces. So you're not using an oxide and then a regular glaze on top of that?
Yes, there's some oxide washes there. I use manganese a lot. And then the glaze itself will run, and as it runs, it pulls whatever is underneath.
So you put the manganese on first and then the glaze?
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of want to know what Laureen is working on over there.
I know. I love it.
And Sue has a question too, Laureen. You're on.
Christina, the going back to the big head, which is a fascinating piece that you saved for last. Did you do a mock-up? Did you do a test to get those, figure out the glazes in advance, or you just took your chances? And is it all done at cone 6? Do you ever go beyond 6 or add any other reduction elements?
Right. So this piece is actually cone 2. It was fired to cone 2.
Okay.
And then it was glazed to cone 03.
Wow.
So it's all in
You
that
do
range.
You do a little mock-up first?
So
Or
I
you
did a drawing of it. And then if you go to my Instagram account, there's a photo of it and it's on this state, and you can see the drawing behind it. And in terms of the surfaces, I do test a lot. And I try to get a sense of what's going to happen. And as much as I can, because it does have kind of a mind of its own. So I can show you, for example, this.
Show us. Laureen, show us what you're doing. Move your fingers.
I move my fingers.
Back
I'm working on hair.
So this is just like an example of, something I had that I didn't complete. And then so this became a test for surface. And I make notes on it with Sharpie and just try to build up. This is another, because the glaze, depending on how you layer it, will do different things. So many of these around the studio, and I invite you to always have that surface practice alongside the building practice. For me, it's almost like balancing the two sides of my brain. And it helps me just be more fluid in the different facets of the studio. If I let one lag, then I end up with all this bisqueware, and I'm just really lost as to how I'm going to finish it and what I want to fit, how I'm going to resolve the ideas. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I hate to do this, but I think we have to go. Are there any last minute questions? Okay, well, wow, Cristina, I mean, for the people whose cameras are on, I can see that we're all like glued up against our screens here, really enjoying every single minute of this, and how beautifully you articulated your working process. So I know we all really appreciate that. I just want to point out that, again, tomorrow, so today was all about the how you work, and tomorrow there's another virtual presentation from 2 to 3 that is all about the why and your influences in your overall career. So I hope all of you will join us for that. If you would like to join us and you have not already signed up, you can go to JRA.org and sign up for that. It is free. and open to the public. So come and tell all your friends to join us too. But you do have to register because there will be a link that gets sent out that you'll need. But anyway, back again, I'd like to really thank you, Cristina. This was an amazing demo, and we really appreciate you spending your time this afternoon with us.
Yes, my pleasure. It was great. Thank you so much for the great co-hosting, and I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.